finding myself with a few hours to kill, it seemed prudent to grab a rod, a net, a couple of slices of bread, and head down for a little wander along the River Dudwell. Now, I have to say, it's rather optimistically called a river. It's more of a small ditch with some pools in it, but it is known as a river, and it's a tributary of the River Rother, the East Sussex Rother, and it's a fantastic place to just travel light, ducking from pool to pool, keeping an eye out for anything that might move, because it does on occasion offer the chance of a few fish. It's never the sort of place where you're going to bag up, and truth be told, in many ways the fishing is secondary to just the solitude and the peace and the views. But if you can find a fish, and you can sneak up on them without spooking them, then there's a very, very good chance that they will readily accept your hook bait almost as soon as it hits the water. As was the case here when I rounded the corner and found a chub setting in some shallows. And you can see how narrow and shallow the river is here. But on well matched tackle, it's incredibly good fun and good sport. And I was quite pleased to get off the mark with what was my very first cast, because there's been plenty of occasions where that hasn't been the case. And actually this fish is at the bigger end of what I'd expect to catch here, and quite possibly is the biggest chub I've caught from the Dudwell. A lovely looking fish, and probably a fish that you'd be pleased of from a much bigger river, certainly from the Rother further downstream. But you can see from this shot here, it is very important to have a long-handled landing net, because otherwise your chances of either getting the fish out the river or getting them back in is pretty remote. But it's a superb way to fish. Just the bare essentials, and walking down through the Dudwell Valley as the sun sets, stopping at any and every likely looking pool. It's the essence of fishing, simplicity itself. And when it comes to tackle and tactics, there's nothing more simple than a hook tied on the end of the line and a bit of bread folded around the hook. And probably the only thinking I give to this tactic is if it's a deep pool, I'll squeeze the bread so it sinks quicker. If it's a shallow pool, I'll leave more flake so it wafts in the current. And it really is as simple as just finding these rafts or deeper pools, dropping a bait in and seeing what happens. It won't always be successful, and in fact that pool wasn't successful, so I gave that up quite quickly. But you just move along to the next one. Now when I got to the next pool, I actually encountered another angler, someone out fishing, someone far better than me, and I kind of figured if they thought this was a good spot, it must be good for a fish or two, because it was a kingfisher. But like me, he didn't really appreciate the company, and he was quick to disappear. And seeing as he'd vacated the swim, I thought it'd be rude not to give it a go. And I had actually seen a chub loitering underneath those stumps on the far bank. But this is the challenge, is getting the bait to where the fish are and then being able to get the fish out from all the roots and the branches. Well, I thought I was in with a fairly good chance on this little bit. I could, as I was concentrating, I could hear a ominous rumbling sound approaching in the distance, and it turned out not only was I going to be treated to display from a kingfisher, but something equally impressive, because as the rumbling got louder and louder, so a Spitfire appeared from over the horizon and put on a fantastic display. So having been treated to that, and with the sun fast falling behind the horizon, I thought I'd better mosey along and get down to another pool and try something, well, not something different, same old, but see if I couldn't find another fish. Now it's interesting that back when I first started fishing this in the 80s, you could expect to catch most species, chub, dace, roach, perch, eels, brown trout. There was a small but important run of sea trout, and on occasion I even saw a couple of pike. But over the years they've steadily been replaced by chub. And I think some of that is because, as you can see, the river runs very deep within its banks, but where I'm sitting, from autumn round to spring, it's not unusual for that to be under 10 to 12 inches of water, because this is all floodplain. And as soon as we get any amount of rain, it does back up. But across the bottom of the valley there's a series of ditches and depressions, and I think in part what's happened is some of these other species of, when the floods have come, especially out of season floods, sort of spring floods, they've taken refuge in the ditches, they've taken refuge in the depressions, and they've ended up kind of getting marooned there and becoming easy fodder for heron and kingfisher, and even white storks. Earlier this year there was a family of 4 white storks that took up residence for a short time, and it seems that maybe the chub are either more prolific or more resilient, because for the longest of times they took a real foothold, and by the early noughties, mid noughties, the stretch was full of chub. Chub such as these. which is another lovely fish. And the deer came out to play as well. So they like to hang about in the valley, although they're very, very keen on the maize that's on the other side of the valley. And by now it was very nearly dusk, so last chance saloon, one last pull. But yeah, there was a huge number of chub in the water, but not very big. The fish I've just returned, that would have been at the biggest end of what was in the river in this stretch, whereas now it's maybe more average size, because it does seem that the chub population has taken a bit of a dive, but those that are left are slightly bigger, have grown on slightly better. And encouragingly, this year I've actually seen a couple of sea trout par on the shallows, but they are lightning fast. The second the shadow hits the water, they're gone. But it is nice to see them. So who knows, maybe what goes around comes around, and slowly other species will come back. But from what I can tell, at the moment it still does seem to be predominantly chub. But they offer great sport, so I'm not complaining too much. It was just more enjoyable when it was slightly diverse, but slightly more diverse. And again, this was another chub. And again, pretty much peas in a pod with that second fish. But with the mist rolling down the valley behind me, it seemed that it had been a couple of hours well spent. And a most enjoyable evening.